Okay, so this is another episode of For Your Imagination. This one was really interesting for me. It was about master planning and urban design. And so we're thinking about designing experiences really for the long term. We dug into a sense of place. How do you create meaning around a place? And how do architects and experienced designers start from what might be a blank sheet of paper and find where the significance and meaning is of a place? It's also really interested in how you can create a culture around spaces, whether it's city squares and parks or new developments, new residential and mixed-use developments. And the interaction between landscape architects, master planners, engineers, and experienced designers in some of the work that we do here at Imagination. We dig into how do you understand human behaviors, how do you think about how communities might use it, and how you measure the value of these spaces, and some really great insights from some of our guests around the hard metrics, the hard commercial metrics, but also some of the human well-being metrics and climate and sustainability metrics, all of which are becoming increasingly important as we think about how we design the spaces that we live in and how we think about and reimagine the cities and places that we want to occupy. So I do hope you enjoy it. I found it really interesting. Hello and welcome to another episode of For Your Imagination. We are back here in the Imagination Lab, and today we're talking about architecture of belonging, and particularly thinking about master planning, how you design for human experiences and create a sense of place in future cities and cities around the globe. We've got a wonderful panel today. Ceylan Belek-Ombert, partner at Martha Schwartz Partners, Landscape Architecture, and Christoph Castanera, my colleague from Imagination, who heads up the strategy practice in our Middle East offices. So welcome to you both. Thank you so much for coming. And Ceylan, perhaps we can start with you. If you could just introduce yourself and where you're from.
Hello, hi. So my name is Ceylan. I'm a partner at MSP, and we are a landscape practice, a global practice. I run the London studio. We have more than 40 years of experience and also in Middle East. And we have an artistic approach to landscape architecture. And I'm very happy to be with you today. Thank you.
Christoph.
Hey Tom, so my name is Christoph and I head up the strategy at Imagination Middle East and looking specifically after the experience design team. So what we do is work with partners like Martha Schwartz to design the experiences that overlay these developments and destinations. So whether it's kind of the master plan side, working on how do we kind of join up the customer experience and design for the moments and programming, working with the landscape, working with the architects, or it might be, for example, working on the experiences like the visitor centres within these experiences to bring them to life, to set them up for the future. So it's that blend of strategy and creativity and understanding how people tick and designing experiences for them.
So I want to start right at the beginning with this idea of a sense of place. You know, we talk about a sense of place. We think about the places that we love, of having a sense of place. But from an architectural point of view and a landscape design point of view, how do you think about that? Where does a sense of place come from?
So the Romans had a name for it. It's called the genius loci, the spirit of place. And in the 1970s, with the environmental degradation, that's also when the environmental art started. This idea became a serious, academic concept in landscape theory. Particularly through the scholars' work, or like Christian Nolberg-Schulz or George Seddon's work. And according to these scholars, the sense of place, it meant, the emotional, experiential, spiritual, and the symbolic relationship between place and people. So the key here is this relationship, and it gives a meaning to a place. And belief systems, ideologies, or thoughts that are meaningful to that culture shape the place. So the place, and any place on Earth, it's only meaningful through our existence, the humans. As the physicist, cosmologist Brian Cox said, it is, as far as we know, the only place where anything thinks. So that thinking, ideation, creativity, and imagination, and consequently the interaction gives place its meaning and its value. And in that sense, it can be designed, and it's always been designed, and it will continue to be.
So, but that's very interesting. Can you design for it? Because I guess in some ways one might suggest that it comes from the layers of history that build up around the place. But as designers, do you think about designing it from a blank sheet of paper? Can you design this sense of place?
There is never a blank canvas. So every place, I hear from people, I went out to, certain parts of the world, it's desert, there's nothing, there's never nothing. There's always, it's ecology, it's, flora, fauna, there's always something that exists that can help with narrating the place, and it's meaningful, especially to the people that live in that place, that has relationship to the land. So.
Yeah. And Christoph, from your point of view and some of the work that you've done, what are some of the techniques or tools that you have to try and discover these things that exist that have meaning for people?
No, I think it's a great point. I totally agree with you, Jilan. There is always something there. So what we will do is look through the lens of people or the place or the culture. And that could be, for example, the culture that sits in the geology of the place, or the people that are there. So, a good example is the Middle East, because everyone's got this, some people have a perception of it perhaps being more of a blank canvas. But if you think about a couple of projects we worked on together, one particular one was a beautiful area in the mountains near Taif in Saudi Arabia and the Hejaz mountains. And when we dug into it, the villages that were there, the stories of the land and the peaks that were in the land gave rise to this amazing story. But you have to dig into it, you have to speak to locals. Or if you take another example like Qiddiya in Saudi Arabia, the beautiful landscape coming from the peaks and the kind of ecology there that came out of the wadis and how that flows, the whole thing is designed around that. But at the same time, they're not just, say, basing the concept on the geology, are they? They're overlaying new concepts and ideas about play and fun that then create something new as a combination. So I think, if you follow it really strictly, you can kind of be very purist about it. But I think in some cases you can kind of take new things and blend it with what's there in terms of that genus loci and create something new as well. So it's very interesting, I think.
And Jilan, when we were speaking earlier, you were talking about a project that you did in Paris, for example, where you had taken something which was perhaps an area that it had a lot of meaning, but it was extremely poorly used. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Of course, yeah. So that was Place de la République in Paris. And what's interesting with this space is that it was a traffic circle with bits and pieces of land, where we've put it all together. We created this unified space where people can rest, and there's 140,000 people every day that use this space through commuting. There is subway connections, very complex infrastructure underneath the plaza. So with very minor interventions, we've pedestrianized one side of the square. And then we did a fantastic grading along its edge where people could sit along these grand stairs and watch others. People love watching other people in public realm. So it's very theatrical in a way, but at the same time, it's a blank canvas. So there exists a room for anyone to come in and express their, opinions, their demonstrations that take place. With very minor interventions like adding a small pavilion or a water feature. Kids come and interact. We were paying immense attention to where we position these, because climate is also very important. Paris is also heating up. We've added new trees. So it's a flexible space. There are funky chairs that you can move around according to where the sun is. So you have to deliberate people to use the space however they want.
And I guess this is an example of how you can almost change the meaning of a place for people, from a traffic circle, which I'm sure a lot of people have pretty negative emotional responses to something that perhaps has a real sense of community to it.
That's right. Yeah, it brings people together. So, and because it's a public realm, you encounter with people that you would maybe never would have the opportunity to interact with. So that's another thing. We have to find ways to bring various communities together, and that helps us to form in a way a more humanistic, better world.
So this idea of human-centered design or leading with human insight, Christoph, from your point of view, what are some of the ways that you do that to get these to an understanding of the different communities who might be using a space and how you build that basis for design?
It's a great question, because you've really got to sort of look at the behaviours of the people that are in those communities. And it's obviously in Paris, there's been such great work in the sort of stuff that you were doing, also tapping into the parkour culture and building urban environments that take that behaviour. Obviously in London, we've got the great stuff that's in South Bank for the skateboarders. So I think, say you take the culture and perhaps in Dubai, you've got this great combination of locals with their behaviours and how they interact with the public space, and then expat communities, obviously multiple cultures there. So when you're designing, say, for those users, you've got to think about what are the behaviours of locals. It might be long-term expats, it might be, like I say, Emiratis. And you've got to think about how you design for them. So, for example, one example of that would be when you're thinking about multiple group families. Local families, Emiratis, might have multi-generational families, larger groups. You might be designing for average group sizes 7 to 8 people. And so you've got to accommodate that with, say, the way you lay out hospitality, the experiences, how you host and greet them. Whereas perhaps with other communities, you might have, say, more couples and singles that will use the space in a very different way. You've even got things like how mobile phones are used in spaces now, how people take photos of things, interact with the phone for navigation. So you've got this combination of cultures, the way they behave in the urban environment naturally, going with the flow of that. Maybe you can channel that differently. Then you've got things like technology as well. You and I were talking about some really interesting concepts on how to look at this from a structural perspective, but from a programming point of view, we've got to go back to looking at field research, watching what people are doing in those spaces, talking to them about the things that they'd love to do if there were some different situations in those environments. And sometimes younger generations are saying, we want to be able to play more in public places. And sometimes it feels like in some cities, they're held back a little bit, whereas in Paris, what you did was an example of letting that flow, I think.
I think what's also interesting is that, out of those cultural, cultural use of space, the specific cultures, there are some components, design components that appear to be important for those cultures. For instance, like in China, gateway structures are very important, like how you enter the site, the progression, how you proceed into the site. And then, we had to design these two amazing sculpture-like structures. And, you wouldn't think, but in certain cultures, these elements become very important, symbolic, and it's also climate. It affects how people use the space. Like Beijing, for a project, we had to consider the wintertime use of a water feature. We had to make it so sculptural that when they drain the water, it would still look beautiful. And in hot summer days, it helped with cooling the space, and people would be promenading around this artificial water feature, which is like almost 100 meters long. So the use of space and the needs, the climatic needs, also inform us on designing these bespoke elements within the design. It helps with programming too, making the space active 24/7. It helps with seasonality and programming.
So I want to come back to the programming point, but perhaps related. From a methodology point of view, perhaps some people from the outside think that master planning starts with a genius with a black marker pen drawing a skyline. Is that true, or how has it changed in this integration between the space and the life within the space? How do you, from a methodology point of view, how do you go about doing it?
So I think what has changed is definitely involving communities at early stages of a project. That's been the biggest change in my, even in my like 20 years of practice. I've seen that in various contexts, and the format of this changed. It's very different in the US. I practiced in the US too, or the projects we did in China or in Middle East. But in every context, at various levels, there is interaction with the community, and taking feedback and then incorporating that feedback into the master planning processes. But I think that the best outcome is really getting various disciplines involved at very early stages of a project, and also getting the communities involved. Even when you're thinking of a brief as an investor, developer, you should get first the community feedback, pulse check, understand what they're, and I think if you do that also, the development will be embraced. There will be less difficulty in, passing through all these planning approvals. So that's extremely good practice. But also hearing different opinions of these multidisciplinary teams. Like, we talked about, interconnected ecosystems. There is a, physical ecosystem where the architects, landscape architects, ecologists are working on stuff. And there's the digital ecosystems where, we deal with AI, data, and all these digital tools, how we incorporate them into our designs. And the social ecosystem, the businesses, the stakeholders, governance of place. So when all of these various disciplines and interested parties come together at earlier stages, then through that early interaction, different viewpoints could be considered, and the master plan will be much more successful.
Yeah. And Christoph, in your experience of this, have you found it interesting how experience design, which perhaps traditionally is seen as a much further downstream practice, can change that?
It's changed a lot. I think those layers that you talked about, Jolanda, are really key. I think the thing that it's always been there, but I think it's been accelerated perhaps more in the GCC because there's such sort of healthy competition for all these developments, to placemaking, to put countries on the map, and to look after the communities that are growing very fast, the local communities. So it's the thing that I think was missing a little bit earlier on, which has really sort of come to bear the last sort of 5 years, is the user, the customer. So it's not necessarily about saying, there was always planning around the customer. People would go, right, here's the business plan, here's the dot map, the master plan. How are people moving between it? And what they would do is, sometimes without research, decide what customers were going to do, and then show a plan that says, oh, everyone's using it all correctly, 20% utilization, the business plan works. When you speak to the customers with research, they might say to you, that distance is too far, or I don't want to use that building. And suddenly it gets messier, because you may have to adjust the plan earlier on to make it right. But by setting it right early on, as you were saying, you come up with a much better livable plan from the get-go, just in terms of the basic setup of that master plan. And then the next layer is, specifically with things like programming, is how are you going to get people to come back? So on one side, it's bringing the customer earlier to make sure that you've got an authentic journey through that master plan. And then the second bite of it is really making sure the programming is set so that they don't just come back once.
Okay,
because you need that repeat visitation.
So when you say programming, let's dive into that. Are you talking about creating a culture within a space?
Yes.
What does it look like?
I think from our side, there's different layers of programming, different layers. When we work with Jane and the team, they're thinking about it from an angle we'll come back to, I guess. But from say more experiential side, we'll be thinking about what's happening in terms of that place feeling alive from a human culture perspective. And that begins with the pre-launch phase. So it might be that there'll be a visitor experience centre which sets up like a microcosm of the development. So people that are going to go and buy off plan, they are kind of thinking about what that experience might be like to live in or visit, and then planning that out so that you get people to build communities, membership. How do you create programming in event spaces that has like community centres typically, in any country? How do you build those spaces and communities, build an ecosystem so that when you move into the place, it already feels like it's got a life and culture to it. It doesn't feel like it's too quiet. And that starts to build the energy, increases residents, longevity increases the visitation. So I think that programming side as an overlay to the master plan in the early stages. And then you've got to think about long term. How are you going to keep that fresh? Are you going to drop new buildings or experiences through the, say, 5-6 year phase of the master plan to keep it fresh, to keep it moving as well. So that's the kind of focus we'll tend to have. Perhaps more on the experiences side that overlays on the landscape, I think.
We call these projects, like you mentioned, sales center teasers, so teaser projects. So we're often asked to develop demo zones, particularly in the context of China, that represents how that development is going to look like, feel like at the later stages when it's completed. So a small fragment of our landscape is being like constructed, demonstrated, and and these teasers are great. I mean, I think of one of our projects which was supposed to be a teaser project, and it ended up, it's called Chongqing. And we were influenced by the mountainous region, this beautiful mountains of Chongqing region, misty mountains. So we've created a landscape that draws people in from the road down to the sales center. And we had these glowing light sculptures, canopy structures that took people down, and it ended up becoming a permanent park. It was so much loved by the community that they decided to keep it. So these teaser projects are great, but it doesn't always have to be something physical. It could be also digital that engage people. There's so many tools now. I mean, you know better than I do. But these social engagements, they come in lower cost, and they're quick solutions. But I think one challenge we face is this accepted definition of social value in the built environment. It's much like how landscape is misunderstood as the backdrop of any development. So whereas it's actually a very strategic asset. It helps with, it's got so many economic benefits in the long run to developments. It's an infrastructure that helps with improving the performances of site.
Yeah.
So.
I want to come back to that idea of a strategic asset versus something in the background. But just before we do, Christoph, Ceylan made the point you don't have to actually build things to bring it to life. And selling it in and creating a sense of place for people before something exists. What are some of the sort of digital tools that you've used?
I think with that, obviously, you can create teaser assets digitally. You can allow people to kind of virtually visit the plans and bring them to life. So perhaps say in the teaser demo center, you can have CGIs that people can go through to give them that sense of place. They can get a feel for it physically and then see the rest of that master plan. Also, I think, going back to the kind of idea of the land, you can use AR lenses now to show overlays of what the place will look like. But there's also things like, when we're working together on a couple of those projects, sometimes you just need to do simple things. So say in a project where there's natural wadis or natural places with some kind of spaces or some kind of relief to walk on, you just need to lay some beautiful pathways and walkways, use flora and fauna that's there indigenously and bring that out, which is what you guys do. And you create an environment that people just want to be in, which doesn't mean you have to build buildings and build all these things. So there's a project, just quickly, there's a project in Dubai that we did some work on where there's already an existing race course. And straight away, that race course was a really interesting heart of the development. And they're planning the visitor centre as an extension of that race course, so that it straight away brings that character and genus loci of the place, because it makes people, you don't have to build everything new, use what's there and build around it. And then what we would do, say from an imagination perspective, is work with Ceylan and her team and then overlay those experiences. It could be light installations, it could just be walkways. But with digital, with the next generation using it much more actively in terms of second screening, even when they're walking around, you have to think design for that now, and that's part of the mix, I think.
And using immersive media can almost put you into a place without the place existing.
And people are happy living in these two mediums, like the IRL space, which they're fully sensorially engaging in, and at the same time they're comfortable then having the kind of future version on the phone, or perhaps using games and location-based technology to even play games with spaces, and we're seeing a lot of that being used now too.
I guess what you're saying is you have to create the experience of the place. You have to give people the experience.
Yes.
You don't have to build the place, but if you can replicate the experience.
A brochure is not enough. I mean, I think if you're talking about sort of standard real estate, we know that it's generally a commercial investment. You know what the size is, but when we're doing kind of mixed-use developments that are mixing nature and leisure, we have to create something new. And as you say, we have to kind of start with an introduction to this space, because these plans take a long time. If you're building on brownfield or greenfield site, you can't just slap down something new. You've got to work with that land, and that means the development will probably take longer. That's our experience anyway.
One of the strategies now the developers use is to bring the public realm, the park, for instance, at the early stages of the development. So because spaces like that, like parks and public spaces, they have the ability to bring people, communities together, and with a little bit of programming, you can introduce some events. So at the earlier stages of the project, you establish your park, you're already pulling everyone together, bringing the communities together, and then in the next stage you can start your building buildings. So that's one strategy that's been used. I can think of examples like Mayfield in Manchester. That's a great one. So and
is it a bit like this idea of passive curation versus active curation? So passive would be creating the space and knowing that people will fill it with life, whereas active curation might be creating the program of events or
that's it. But you've got to get the balance right, and it's like every set has a different equation of what is right for active and right for passive. And I mean, our experience is like when we work with them, Jen and the team, like first of all, it's like what's already there, what should we be working with that's passive, and that's where that team will go, well, we've already got all these things, look at this topography, look at this, let's keep it light. And then we might be like, okay, maybe in the visitor centre, or there may be an intervention at the top of a walkway where we might create an installation or something with light to give it a sense of making people walk between points to create a journey. But if you just overdo it and you just start to just dump technology on top of environments, people don't actually want that. They want it to be integrated, don't they?
The land, in a way, it tells you what there needs to be. In this example that we've been discussing, it was, they had agricultural landscapes, terrace landscape already. So we used that to regrade the site, and that informed the way in which we've come up with all these programmatic elements, thematic spaces within the development. So it became, agrotourism, agricultural terraces, all these become very important key to the development of the spatial design of the project. So,
and I guess it carries those stories and meaning through from the original landscape into the future.
Absolutely, and that's why the blank canvas point is a complete misnomer about the GCC. Everywhere, as mountains, rivers, wadis, there's all the kind of, the forestry that sits on the mangroves. So actually, there's just a story of the tribe or the family that had heritage there. So going back to your point about Genus Loci, you overlay these circles of people and place and culture, and you're always going to find something exciting to work with, and work with that, and that makes it very exciting and different each time.
Okay, I want to come back to your point, Jelan, about it being a strategic asset, not just a building, and thinking more about the commercial case and ROI. Can you talk about how you as a practice think about ROI, or how you help your clients to understand the true value of master planning?
Yeah, I think landscape has, the advantage of its size, scalability, and adaptability within, any context. So it's the connective tissue between everything, in between everything. So, and we know that it can it can fix, cure the problems of, the cities that we're facing, the cities that are facing in terms of climate change. They can mitigate flood risk, they can capture carbon, they can manage stormwater, so all these risks, and not just that, from human perspective too, public health, well-being. So now we're facing with social isolation, so all of these can be cured through implementing landscapes within our urban landscapes or any landscape, and these are all tangible these are all with tangible economic value.
Hard
So
metrics.
it's exactly, and but I mean, I have to say that we don't always have to put a monetary value to things. It's very important also to accept that nothing can replace the joy and pleasure that a child gets or a human gets in especially in deprived communities when we provide them with high quality amenity spaces. So this is very important. Apart from all these monetary values we can measure and prove that we know, for instance, that any real estate that's closer to within the proximity of, now I can't remember the exact value, but like maybe 200 meters away from a public space, it increases the value 5 to 20%. So there are all these like numbers that can convince developers, investors to invest in landscape. But apart from that, there are also these human values that we have to provide.
Yeah.
It creates the canvas for it, and I think, on that commercial side, obviously, that I totally agree with you, Gillian. Like, also, as a citizen, you're lowering the cost of care for that citizen if they're happier and healthier. So obviously, there's that macroeconomic effect, which I think we're still trying to calculate with circular economics and things like that. But on the commercial side, there's a couple of things to say. I think one is that increasing with the right active programming and passive programming of experiences, you can definitely increase hard metrics like dwell time, residency length, repeat visits, and spend. So you can design something which we know through the way we measure experiences will basically increase that. But there is another side to it, which is that if you overdo the programming, which pushes up your operational costs too much, too many stages, your cost of running the destination is too high. And that's why I think there's always a tension there for developers to try and figure out, first of all, investing in a great public realm, right? And I think everyone's smart about that now, and that's why Martha Schwartz do such amazing work. And now everyone's figured out that you can create an experience centre to kick off your venue. Then they're like, right, let's invest in some low-level programming for spaces, parks, or nature digs or trails. But that's not enough. You've got to invest in some more advanced strategic programming. But you don't want to turn your development into a holiday park or a theme park with very high staff costs. So there is an equation there. And one of the good things about bringing the programming thinking early into master plan is that you can very quickly work with operational partners who will give you a kind of a bit of a dot figure on how much is that staffing operationally going to cost you. So you can adjust that accordingly. Because if the architect's like, well, great, the programming and landscape's taking care of all this over here, but the operational budgets are flying up over there, that isn't a great equation either. So I think it's also about thinking about being grown up about the economic way of looking at this and making sure that we don't always say programming is the answer to everything. Because it might be great from a consumer point of view, but it might not be economically viable. So how do you get the landscape, the programming, the buildings to all work together for the perfect formula, really?
I think one way maybe is to, and we see that often, that through consultation with all the stakeholders and communities, that you get the right programming, so you understand what exactly interests people. And so that you're investing in the right type of programming rather than throwing your money out to like anything and everything.
Absolutely right. Especially with the, going back to the audience point on communities, what different cultures enjoy when they eat their food, when they come together, is a really interesting point. So, in Dubai, you get these great intersections around, everyone does Halloween things, even though not everyone follows what Halloween's about in different cultures. Everyone's out when there's Diwali because all the lights are out on the houses. Obviously, Eid al-Adha, is a time when everyone's getting together. Eid al-Fitr. Everyone comes together in these communities at those points. So they're great tissue to build programming around, cultural moments that bring people together through food, being out of their house, being outside. But then another layer is, how do you then think about those behaviours? Because some communities are not going to engage in certain activities. And as you say, you've got to program it the right way and design it. Taking what works in, say, New York and just dumping it into Riyadh is not going to work. But you can bring new ideas and innovations in, and vice versa works as well. So I think that's an interesting point.
And I guess it's about, you're trying to design almost a self-sustaining system.
That's right.
Where, short-term events are one thing, but actually you're trying to design something which ultimately builds a culture and a pattern of behavior around itself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that begins with the communities in the developments. You know, that might be volunteer communities. There's a development we worked on together, which is like a sports destination, and such an important part of that sports destination around this beautiful landscape was how do the local sporting communities get involved in that, and building that connection with the communities in Riyadh, people that are into biking. Some of those sports are established, some of them are not so established as, say, other markets. So how do you build that ecosystem of local grassroots through programming, through community? Maybe you support that with sports bodies from the country as well to support it, maybe with some subsidies for training, getting people out there. And as soon as you build that community, there's a core team in the development, there's a volunteer community, the local community, then it starts to flow, doesn't it? And you don't have to, you don't have to pour lots in on top, because you just build it up from the grassroots. And that begins with early planning. You talked about community engagement. That's the point, isn't it? Think about that early, speak to the communities. What do they like doing? Well, let's work with the flow of what they do, rather than trying to import it. I think it's important.
And have you noticed a shift in the last couple of years from a developer's point of view, that they're actually paying more attention to these things rather than simply, structural design?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a shift. I think also, there are there are risks associated with what's happening in the world with climate change, and policies. They've enforced developers to follow certain trends and moves. So it's so there's a bit of that they kind of have to, in a way, and it's not always a thick boxing exercise, but at the same time, they have to protect their assets. So so we do get questions like from developers, like, how climate resilient is this project? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? So, but there is still this understanding of landscape as something that delivers a pretty picture. So there's still this notion of not understanding its performative aspect, that actually it does solve all these problems associated with, but it's a changing trend I see, sometimes willingly or sometimes unwillingly, but it has to happen given what we've been witnessing in today's world. So
brilliant. Well, I wanted to wrap up by perhaps asking you to think about one of your favorite recent projects, or one that's particularly memorable or dear to you, and if you could put your finger on why you think it's so special. Why don't we start with you, Christoph?
Yeah, I've talked about a couple of interesting ones, but I think there's a particular project that we worked on, King Salman Park in Riyadh. And I think that project was the most interesting from the consumer perspective.
So King Salman Park is what?
So basically, in the centre of Riyadh, there's an old airport, and so it's a big kind of urban space, brownfield site. It's being redeveloped into a park that is bigger than, I think it's two and a half times bigger than Hyde Park. So think of it like the Central Park for Riyadh, right? So a huge site. And the master plans are really interesting because they're effectively finger parks that intersect with the fabric of the city. There are then kind of strategic parks which are inside the layer of that. And then there is this central circle which is surrounded by a kind of a circular walkway, which is very nature integrated, which is effectively the wilder part of it. And why it was really interesting was, we're not landscape architects, so that part was done. What we had to do was think about how you program it. What do people do? And when we did our research, we found some really interesting tension. So, for example, for the local Saudis, big natural green environments obviously exist already. There's trees, but not at the scale of this. So they were thinking about, for example, it being a more controlled space when we researched them. For example, when we talked about dog walking areas, they were like, well, we want dog areas to be separate. When we talked to expats who live in Riyadh, they were like, I want to walk my dog in parks and let them run free. And so you had this tension between what locals want nature to be and animals to be in nature, and what some, say, Western expats want. Then you talk to South Asian expats, they have a different view. East Asian, Chinese expats have a different view. So you're almost designing a park for the world with all these intersections of behaviours. At the same time, the longevity of the park is for Riyadh, it's for the Riyadhis, it's for Saudis. So that for me was great, because we found this beautiful intersection of how we come up with the zoning of the programming to work with that landscape and work with what people wanted. And for me, that was the most interesting project, because it sat at the heart of that. What is the consumer insight? What do people really want? But also pointing towards what it could be. You know, you can't just design it around the behaviours now. You've got to design it around the behaviours of the future. With the young generation in Saudi is a game changer for the demographics of the country. So yeah, that would be my one.
Great.
Mm-hmm. Oh my God, this is a tough. I think this is the most difficult question. I mean, I can think of like in my career, I can think of one project I worked on in the US, which was a transformation of a dammed river into a public park. When you see the effect of, you know, not just physical, but also what it does to the communities. This was in downtown Stamford, Connecticut. It's just impressive, the transformation that you see in a city. Another project I can think of is this large-scale international airport landscape master plan we did in King Khalid. We've looked at, we aimed at a carbon negative airport. And in that one, we were looking at very large-scale moves in terms of making the landscape really work for taking the carbon down. So desert greening, enhanced rock weathering. So it was a very collaborative scientific project. We had, you know, DAC machines, and we used biochar to enrich the soils. So when you start diving into what actually landscapes do at the scale of, you know, like 280 square kilometers of land, you realize that actually, you know, it's in-depth potential of how the way we approach can actually, it's a way of changing, shifting our thinking and changing the way we live our lives. So it's a perspective shift. And I think if we start approaching landscape from that angle, and we haven't mentioned, I noticed, art at all, but I like to say that what art does is, any of our projects is bringing this very critical thinking, in-depth thinking, in diving into really understanding what people are about, what cultures are about, what places are about, what landscapes are about, using really artistic approach as a way we look at things. So it's the lens, the perspective that brings us is so important. So we should not let this creative, imaginative, artistic approach behind and focus too much on, you know, what it can scientifically do. So there needs to be a balance on, you know, creativity. I mean, we didn't mention, but for instance, wind, light, these are things that exist in any place. So there is no place that there is no wind and there's no light. So sometimes these could be the inspiration of our design, all these phenomenal, you know, things that exist. So yeah, as I said, there is no place with nothing. And yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I think that's such a great note to end on, this idea of transformations, that you can, you know, there's no place with nothing, but you can have an incredible impact on a place and create these transformations. And the potential for master planning, when you think about it from a human experience design, and as you say, from a scientific and rational point of view, but also from a kind of emotional, artistic, imaginative point of view, you can really create a deep impact over time for people.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you so much. Great discussion.
Thank you.
Yeah, we look
Thanks,
forward
Tom.
to see what comes next.
Thank you.
Well, there we have it. So much to spark the imagination. I hope you enjoyed that discussion. I certainly did. And I guess if there's one thing I'll take away from it is the power of design to really transform a place and transform people's lives when you think about it and design it in a human-centric way. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you at the next one.